All right, and we're live. Chillcast MMA, Nixon underscore speaks on Twitter, and I'm joined by Austin Brodie at MMAPanic. So we've actually got a fight announcement that just came through about 15 minutes ago, so we might as well start with that before we get to anything else. Johnny Walker, he's going to be taking Nikita Krylov. So that's interesting for both Krylov and Walker, both coming off losses. For Krylov to go over Teixeira, for Walker, who sits at 17-4. Obviously, we know he just lost to Corey Anderson. So, Austin, right off the bat, any thoughts on this fight?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll be honest, I kind of forgotten about Walker ever since, that defeat against Corey Anderson. But I wondered what they would do with him if, because he had a lot of hype behind him. I wonder if they would take a huge step back or do what they did here, which is definitely a step back in competition, but not too much. Krylov is still a recognizable name in that division. It's still a tough matchup, so he's getting right back on the horse pretty soon. So we'll see what mindset he comes into this fight with. We'll see if he takes it a little bit more serious. We've seen him play around a lot in his career up to this point, and then we've seen him get dominated by an experienced fighter. So we'll see what his mindset is like coming into this fight. And both men, like you said, coming off of losses, both desperate for a win. So it should be a pretty awesome fight, I think.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to it. I think they're doing Johnny Walker a lot of favors with as far as location where they're putting it. It's going to be in Brazil. I do believe that's March 14th. Go back to that. Yeah, March 14th, 2020 in Brazil. So I do think the matchmaking and the location favors Walker, really. I don't like it as far as if he loses, where it is Johnny Walker really go from there. But, I mean, if he can go back to what he was, and hopefully he learned something as far as being humble when another ranked guy is in front of you. But if he learned that, and he goes back to what we saw prior to the Corey Anderson fight, I feel like everything will be good. For Krylov, if he wins, he's kind of back and forth. Like, he's currently in the middle of that pattern. He's got the loss to Glover Teixeira. Prior to that, it was a win over OSP. Prior to that, it was a loss to Jan Blachowicz. So it's going to be interesting to see with him, does he actually string together some wins in here? I know he had some time outside of the UFC. And ever since he's been back, he's 1-2. So if he can break even, that's a hell of a way to start 2020. So I like it from that perspective for him. But anything else, X's and O's, expecting to see anything, any new wrinkles you think we'll see from Krylov or Walker?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to really get into some of the recent fights to come up with a theory of what's going to happen. But I think the interesting part will to see what kind of Johnny Walker we get. If he's super aggressive, if he's as relaxed and flowing as he used to be, or if he's more technical and precise to try to get a win, or it'll be curious to see if we get a more disciplined, conditioned fighter that's just looking to get a win, or if we're still going to see a pretty wild fighter, which is a lot of fun to watch. So that's what I think is the most interesting, just right off the bat.
Yeah, I'm hoping at Johnny Walker, I'm hoping he can show some of that explosiveness, but I'd like to see him start to temper it down a little bit. I know he's often talked about that and alluded to it, but that's as far as I go on that one. And for Krylov, I just want to actually see him on a win streak now that he's back in the UFC. So that's as far as I'll go on that one. But again, like I said, I just wanted to touch on that fight since just got announced a little bit before we started. It seems like the freshest thing on the docket. But what I wanted to talk about, we all know UFC 246 is on the way. Conor McGregor, he's going to be taking on Donald Cerrone. And instead of dragging it out, trying to add little bits and pieces of the fight and going about it that way, I'm just going to break this down into different parts. We're going to do 3 parts. One where we talk about the outside of the cage factors. One where we talk about the technique and give a technical analysis of what we see from Conor McGregor. One for Donald Cerrone. So that's sort of the plan, and this is going to be the first one where we talk about the outside of the cage factors, things like that. So right off the bat, might as well start with Donald Cerrone. Austin, when you look at him heading into this fight, he's definitely in an interesting space. I don't feel like that's too crazy to say. But what do you see as far as his mindset? Where do you think he's going to be coming into this one from a headspace?
Yeah, it's real interesting. I think obviously I think it'd be a lot different if the fight with Gaethje, his last fight, if that would have went a little bit differently. If he comes in there on a winning streak against Conor, I think he rides in a lot of confidence. I don't know if that's totally the case. I'm sure he's going to be somewhat confident. Excuse me. I know he's wanted this fight a long time, but you know, it seems as if someone, if not Conor, the UFC, someone picked this fight for Conor. Because Gaethje was out there. Gaethje just knocked out Cowboy, but Conor or whoever chose for him is having him fight Cowboy. That might mess with the head of Cerrone. And in the past, we have seen Cerrone let the pressure of the moment get to him a little bit, like his title shot with RDA and some other big fights. But he's he's one of the most. He is the most experienced UFC fighter in history. Once he gets in there and gets moving, I think things will work out for him, and he can kind of get his flow. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what kind of headspace he's in. If he comes in confident, if he lets the moment get to him, and I think the first signs of that will be the fight week leading up to it. When they have to do the press conference on the Wednesday before, and then the weigh-ins, when Conor's going to be there in your face, mocking everything about you, and then all of his fans are going to be booing you, and that's something Cowboy's not used to. He's a huge fan favorite, so there'll be a lot of mental hurdles for Cowboy to get over, to be able to just get in there and perform well for this fight. But that's kind of what you sign up for one of these Conor McGregor paydays, though, I think.
Yeah, it's like with the old Cowboy, as far as his mindset was heading into some of his prior fights, it just feels like he would get caught up in the moment just a little bit too much. And heading into this one, out of all of the previous Conor McGregor opponents, if I had to pick one that would be the most subject to any sort of mental warfare, we can break down whatever that actually means, but just the sort of general gist of it, if I had to pick one out of the hat that would be the most susceptible to it, it would be Donald Cerrone. So for me, that's going to be interesting to see, how does he handle that? Does he succumb to it, or does it actually embolden him? I know one of the talking points for him, as of the past 2 years or so, and again, this fight is going down UFC 246, January 18th, 2020, at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. Donald Cerrone, he sits at 36-13. Conor McGregor, he's 21-4. And again, as always, you can find me on Twitter at Nixon_speaks, and you can find Austin at MMAPanic. And again, one of the things that if you look at Cerrone, he's coming off of 2 losses into this, but one of the things outside of that I have to consider is that he's made a talking point that he's now a father. He's talked that up, and he's bringing his kid in the cage for the post-fight interviews and all that. And it seems like he's in a space now. We see other fighters go through this where they hit a spot. Nate Diaz went through this, where they hit a spot where they're not content with mediocre. And I think that feeling just so happens to line up with the fact that he's 0-2 coming into this fight, 1-2 out of his last 3. And I feel like the feeling of, I got, if not now, then when? When is that big payday going to come? That is going to match with the fact that his back is up against the wall, and he knows that this is probably his last major opportunity. So what do you think about that? Like, do you think, that fatherhood angle, we see other fighters bring that up, but is that a talking point and all? Is that something that, in some sort of abstract way, I'm not a father, but he's making it a talking point, so therefore it is. Do you think that's something that could play a factor in this fight?
Yeah, man, I agree. Like you said, this is maybe like the Cowboys' last big moment, or it could be his big moment if he's not able to come out successful. Last shot in like the real like mainstream focus of MMA, and it's going to be on top of that, it's going to be his biggest moment ever. He's definitely had some big fights. He's had some title fights, but nothing's going to be as big as walking in there to fight Conor McGregor in front of like what was easily a sold out crowd, and you're gonna have millions of people around the world watching. So it's gonna be the most pressure filled situation of his career. He hasn't been the best at performing under pressure, and it's going to be a real more than it's going to test his physical ability and his physical skills and fighting skills. It's going to test his mental mindset that if he's able to overcome all of this. Because like we've seen guys in the past like Jose Aldo, Eddie Alvarez, world champion, and people that are known for being mentally strong kind of fall to this pressure. So I think that's going to be the real hurdle that Cowboy's going to have to get over with the fight, just to get into the cage and throw a couple things where he starts to feel comfortable. It's going to be hard for him.
Yeah, it definitely is, and it's just like interesting to think if you can go back to I guess this ties into the whole end of decade thing, but if you go back to 2015, he is on an 8 fight win streak heading into that RDA fight back on UFC on Fox, and he loses that, and it was just sort of like, man, did he blow it? Is that it? And even though he went on to still obviously get some wins just due to his style of taking fights whenever, he's always been like that, but we just thought, okay, that he's just sort of settled into being an action fighter, and to think that now he's gonna kick the year off, and potentially, who knows how the whole year could pan out, but he's definitely gonna be in a huge fight to kick the year off. So it's just interesting from that perspective, and I wonder if he really is over that hump in his mind. I know he's talked about it before, those little roadblocks and starting cold, and we saw guys like Robbie Lawler exploit it. And again, don't want to get too technical in this part, but that's just one of those things where I question, is he over that mental hump? Because, boy, are you going to need it against McGregor, because he's going to do a lot of the talking leading up to it, even though, and I guess we can start to transition in this, but I do think that McGregor will be a little bit more tame than he's ever been, but I still think that if he chooses to dial it up, Donald Cerrone, out of all the opponents he's had before, is probably going to feel that the most. And that's going to be interesting to see if he truly is over that. So, again, like I said, transition over to Conor McGregor. I'm going to ask this still to touch on Donald Cerrone, but more so switching the focus to Conor McGregor. The trash talk, we've just sort of glossed over a bit. We know Donald Cerrone has felt it before, and we know Conor McGregor is good at it. Given all that you know that has happened with McGregor since his last fight in the public eye, do you think we will see tame trash talk, or will he dial it up a notch? And on the flip side, is Donald Cerrone over the hump, or is he susceptible to it?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. I'm wondering because, like you said, the out of the cage antics of Conor McGregor over the last few years have kind of soured a lot of people's opinions of him. So maybe coming back and being the brash, confident guy that tears down his opponents mentally before isn't the best move for him, PR wise. So it'll be interesting to see if he do that. And on Twitter, on social media, as of late, we've got a way nicer Conor McGregor who's sending out compliments to Jose Aldo and Frankie Edgar and all these other people who were former opponents. So it seems like he's definitely calmed down some. I think that remains to be seen though. Like once you put a microphone in front of him, when you have Cowboy right there, that's when we'll really see like what his thing is. But I do think Cowboy's susceptible to it. I think if Conor starts really going after him and trashing him, I think that's going to make that moment even bigger. And I do think that's something that would play into the favor of Conor McGregor, but like you said, he's had a lot of accusations and awful things over the last few years, so maybe he wants to kind of stay away from that image and just present himself as a respectable but fierce fighter, which would be nice, refreshing change of pace, but I still expect him to go at Cowboy. If not, maybe he won't make it as personal as he did with recent people like Khabib or Floyd or whatever, but I think for sure he'll definitely go after Cowboy.
What responsibility do content creators and media have to pressure Conor McGregor on some of the allegations he had? Do we write it off as fight promotion? Do we write it off as it's the guy's personal life? Or do we have a responsibility to push the guy about some of the things that have happened allegedly.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing. Obviously, I think it's tricky though, right? Because we need to know if he's guilty or not first, and I don't know how we'd be able to do that. It's why it's kind of inappropriate for this fight to be happening, for the UFC to make this fight happening while he has these allegations out there. I think they should have let that stuff clear up first. But since they didn't let it clear up first, and we don't know for sure if he's guilty or innocent in this whole thing, I think it's the media's obligation to at least ask him about that and what his stance is on it, along with asking Dana White what him and the UFC's opinion on making this fight as these allegations are going on, like if they weighed the pros and cons, or if they're standing behind him, or whatever that case may be. Yeah, I think that's the media in attendance obligation to ask him.
See, I'm glad that we actually, in full disclosure, we did try to record this before, but there was a headphone malfunction on my part. But I'm actually glad that that happened, because since it did, it gave us sort of a little bit more time for me to think on it, because like you said, we don't know all the facts about his alleged sexual assault case. And to me, that's the elephant in the room. Obviously, it's funny that I was able to lay out, I said on what had happened, and you didn't mention the phone incident. You didn't mention the old guy in the brewery. That sort of speaks that this is the elephant in the room. And it's and to me, it's just interesting, because one of the things that I pulled from this, and I'm wondering about, and it's one of the conclusions I came to, the UFC is bad with handling PR on these things. And it's just interesting, with Anthony Johnson, Dana that says nothing at all, but then another fighter runs into something. It's just the UFC has been historically bad with handling these situations, and I wonder, because we, the public, are left in the dark. So what I'm about to say is based on the fact that we, again, are left in the dark. What if the judgment comes down 24 hours before the fight and he's done? What type of PR nightmare does that land the UFC and ESPN and the various other content partners they're in bed with? Like, what happens? I'm just wondering, is the UFC gambling right now? Because we don't know. Or do they know something that we don't, and that's why they went ahead and booked this fight? Like, is the UFC playing with fire right now?
Yeah, I think so, man. And another thing we don't know, and we all hope this doesn't happen, but how do we know something else doesn't happen between now and then? Like, Conor, as great as a fighter and his stuff he's done for the sport, but there's been a pattern of criminal stuff happening in his life over the past 2 years. I think if it's any other fighter, they'd be talking about it. We talk about it with John Jones, and Dana White famously said, I'll never have John Jones main event another pay-per-view because we can't trust that it's going to happen. Of course, he then went back on that almost immediately, but I mean, this is Conor's outside issues match up with John Jones. If not, I mean, if the sexual assault thing is true, obviously they're way worse. So, I mean, it's a risk just to have him on a card, even if the ongoing case isn't there, I think. But even more so, like you're saying.
Yeah, I just think it's a bad move. And again, in full disclosure, we are in the dark on this. We don't know what's going to happen. I'm not sitting here as an expert on European, laws on these. I don't know how the procedure fully plays out, but I would just think that if there's no conclusion on this, how can you book the guy? What if, who knows what happens, and a verdict comes down that isn't favorable towards him, and it's like the week of the fight.
And
then what?
Not to cut you off, but another thing to think about is this is an extremely light fight card. So if Conor's taken off, they're not this. There's no way it can't be a pay per view. I mean, it might be like UFC 153 when they had to just cancel it, because what would they do? Would they carry on a fight card with the main event being Anthony Pettis and Diego Ferreira? So that, I mean, they didn't do it themselves. They didn't give themselves even a backup plan. Put a couple title fights or put another big fight on there to kind of give you something in case, but they didn't do that either.
That is true, and that's another point I didn't think about is if this card. That's why I'm glad we're having this outside the cage thing where we can actually talk about these sort of scenarios. And again, I hope that everything just goes smooth. And we're going to talk about some of the positives that we see with McGregor. But again, like I said, this is sort of the elephant in the room. And these sort of side effects that we're talking about now, these are things that you don't think about now. But if the shoe drops in MMA, which we all know, you got to keep your finger on the pulse every second because it's just crazy. You never know. And I think if the situation happens, isn't Holly Holm versus Raquel Pennington on this card? I think you got to go with that over the Pettis and Fajeda fight. I'm not sitting here saying you do that and you salvage, $500,000. I don't know what the star power of that fight would do in today's day and age, but I think it's a lot better than. Not to say that Anthony Pettis versus Fajeda is nothing, but I think it's a lot better than just scraping the whole card altogether.
I forgot that fight was on there. So you got, because Holly Holm does wherever her star power is at right now. Like you said, I don't know, but that is a name. That's a name people know of.
Yeah, I think just in a crazy world, if it's Tuesday and the plug has to get pulled, pull it, do that fight, run Holly Holm out there. She's good at handling the media. She, like you just said, she's clearly a name. So I think that could be the plan B, but who knows? Hopefully, again, this is a situation that this just becomes irrelevant with time. And that's best case scenario. But thinking about it for Conor McGregor on a positive side, for anyone that follows me on Twitter or anything like that, you guys know I've said, and I said it to you before, but to me, I'm not completely sold on his record heading into this fight because I think that we are looking a little bit into the fact that he lost to Khabib and he lost to Floyd because, again, he lost to Khabib and he lost to Floyd, like two of the GOATs, if you at least believe in the Khabib talk. And we hold the fact that he lost a boxing match against him, but we don't hold it against another athlete if they lose, say, a jiu-jitsu match, or Chris Cyborg, who does a Muay Thai match. We hold it against them and they lose and get embarrassed. We give them a badge of honor. For Conor McGregor, it's his scarlet letter, one of many as of late. And so I think that's a little bit overblown. He's 2-1 in his last 3, 8-2 in his last 10. And if you're going to buy into any of the footage that he's released as far as his sparring is concerned, boy, looks a little sharp. I can't even sit here and lie. And again, yes, we're going to get into the technical parts at a different time, but he at least looks okay for a 31-year-old guy who they say once you make $100 million, you slack off. Doesn't look like he's slacking off anymore. So I just think that, and I'm going to, again, throw this back over to you. What do you think from a positive side? Like, do you think that what sort of positive momentum do you think? Is he looking at this as, okay, time to wipe the slate clean? Or do you truly think that his back is up against the wall and he's feeling it?
I'm not sure, because I'm not a good, I think I'm too close to the situation. I'm not a good gauge on, his celebrity or his star power and if it's waning or if the losses and wins matter or if they don't. So I'm not sure. I think he must look at this fight as a way to lead.
Meaning that you follow the sport.
Right. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Right, yeah. Before anyone hops in your mention saying, what do you mean you're close to the situation?
Yeah, thank you for clearing that. That's exactly what I mean. I just mean I'm too much of a fan. I obviously don't know anybody or know anything. I literally just a fan, so I don't know if I know of the guys on the prelim, so I don't know, the star power isn't as different to me as it would be to someone that only knows of Conor McGregor. But to answer your point, I think it's a way to legitimize himself in the sport. Come back and get a win over a really good veteran. See him in the octagon, see him win, see him call out somebody on the mic, and I think it's a setup to make whatever his next thing is even bigger. So if you had him just come back and fight Khabib, people are gonna be like, man, they just fought and he just lost, and Conor hasn't won in all this time. And the same thing with Masvidal, where they would say that he's coming off all of these losses or whatever. So now if he comes back, he wins, he gets some momentum, he gets some more for the highlight reel for them to hype up this next fight. And then if he gets a win in this, the UFC will let him choose whether he wants to stay at 70 and fight a big fight with Masvidal, or if he wants that second title shot with Khabib. So I think this is a way to kind of like dip your toes back in the water. Not to disrespect Cowboy, because he's not an easy opponent by any means, but it's a way to get back into the cage with an opponent with a name who people know of and people love, get a win, and then set up whatever is going to be the next massive thing in his career.
That one of the things I was just thinking when you were answering that, real quick, pretend you're Conor McGregor for a quick second. What do you say when the media eventually asks you why not Gaethje?
Oh man, I'm stumped, man. I got to be honest, because that's the question I want to know. I don't know. I don't think there's a legitimate, unless you're just being honest. I don't think there's a legitimate answer for that. That I think
Yeah,
the
I
answer is that
don't.
he's a tougher matchup.
Yeah, I don't know what he could say, but that is the one where I'm like, if he does have people that write his stuff, man, I'm paying them overtime to come up with some gold content for when I have to answer
Hmm.
that one. Because I have to think outside of all the other things that we've talked about. When you're talking about fight related stuff, I think that is a question that a lot of people are going to ask him leading up to it. Fight week sort of stuff. And I have to imagine Gaethje will be in the area, or he'll be at least poking the bear a little bit. I'm thinking he's going to be somewhat PR savvy in that regard, so he'll keep his name in circulation. And I mean, who knows? But I was just thinking, and one more thing before I guess we get out of here. One more angle that I wanted to sort of check in with on this fight: his star power. Everyone has made that a talking, and I don't want to sit here and ask the almighty question about pay-per-views, because I think it'll generally just do well. Well, meaning over 500,000. Which in today's day and age, that seems like that's a hell of a benchmark. But his star power, do you think it's taken a hit, and if so, how
Yeah,
much?
I think that's one of the most interesting questions about this card is where his star power is at. Just coming into this fight before we got in that, when it was just getting rumored and stuff, I thought it took a pretty big hit, to be honest, because the stuff I seen from non MMA related media, non MMA related people, was mostly negative about Conor. But once this fight got announced, it seems to kind of be changed. I've seen people kind of getting excited about it, and when the tickets got on sale, they sold like a $10 million gate in no time. So, I mean, that right there shows you. I mean, if he's fighting, I think people are going to be watching. But it was going to be really interesting to see the numbers that come out after this thing. Like you said, we're in a whole new atmosphere as far as what is success pay per view sales wise. Is way different than it was a year ago. So we'll see on that. I think we talked about this in a former podcast, but I'm curious to know, and maybe this again too close to the situation as a fan to know, but I'm curious to know what pay per view is going to do better, this one or Khabib versus Tony Ferguson, because I think Khabib has he has star power too. That fight is a better fight on paper. It's a title fight. I'm sure the card will be better. So I'm curious to see. And, this is gonna be the test to see where he's at right now. And we're gonna be able to see where it's at right now compared to if he wins and what his next card will do.
That is true, and it feels like out of all the fighters on the roster, he's the one with the most questions, right? Like it feels like as far as pay-per-views concerned, we'll be asking all sort of questions about that. And for me, I feel like that will be a talking point, and I feel like over here in the States, he'll still be king, but it's going to be more interesting to see on an international scale who's more popular. Because Conor McGregor, I guess that if you're over here in the States, you would just assume it's Conor McGregor. He's the king of Europe, but I guess, or I would assume Khabib after the campaign he's been on, I think he could rival Conor for that. It will be interesting to see that. So yeah, you do bring up an interesting point, and I think if that's going to play out, it would check in BT or Sky or whatever their international packages are. I think that's where we'll really get our answer to that question. What do you think about that? Or do you think over here in the States, Khabib can rival him too?
I don't know. I really don't know. Khabib had to get propelled by that fight with Conor. Overseas, obviously, Khabib is a huge deal. You see that anywhere it goes. But in the States, as we stand right now, I still think Conor's the bigger draw in the States than Khabib. But overseas is the really the will be a telling one too, because they're both from there. So who does Europe latch onto more? Who does what these other countries? But I think as far as like mainstream star power in America, I think probably Conor. I think most humans in America know who Conor McGregor is. I bet you probably couldn't say that about Khabib. Now, are most humans willing to pay $60 to watch Conor fight? I don't know about that, but most of them know who he is for sure.
Yeah, I wonder about that one too. I don't really lean one way or the other. I would, hey, again, if you're listening to this and you just so happen to be over in Europe, let us know. I would love to know what you guys' temperature is on that. But before we get out of here, and again, we're breaking this down into 3 parts. So this one is, if you're wondering, like, oh, you guys aren't actually talking about the fight, that we're doing that for a reason. So the next time we talk, I guess we'll just start with the B side. We might as well start with Donald Cerrone. So next time we upload one of these, we'll be talking about Donald Cerrone heading into this fight at UFC 246 again, January 18th, 2020. It's going to be Conor McGregor. He's taking on Donald Cerrone. So before we get out of here, Austin, is there anything else you feel like we missed? Any other outside of the cage factors you want to touch
on? The only thing I'll say is, we've talked about like how it's a big pressure moment for Cowboy, and it definitely is. But I think it's, more of the pressure is probably on Conor. He's the one that needs the win more, probably. He's the one that people expect to win. They expect him to kind of have this fight set up his comeback. So there's a lot of pressure on him, too. I think why we just don't talk about it as much is because he has shown over his career that he is very, very good at handling the pressure and performing well under, the most pressure we've ever seen in the sport. So I just don't want it to seem like all the pressure's on Cowboy, because there's definitely a lot on Conor McGregor. If he comes out of this with another loss, who knows? So there's a lot of pressure on him too. He seems to bask in it more than, run away from it.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see. I tend to agree with you on most of those points, but I don't really have anything. I feel like we did a pretty good job of covering most of the outside the cage stuff. And like I said, next time we upload one of these, it'll be talking about Donald Cerrone and what we see from him heading into this fight. So before we get out of here, Austin, let the people know where they can find you, social media, websites, anything like that.
Yeah, you can find me at Twitter, at MMAPanic, and the website is MMAPanic.com. Go there for articles and videos and all sorts of cool stuff.
All right, you heard it there. Actually, before we get out of here, one last thing. I guess we usually do it under the radar, so we'll just file it under that, or a little bonus segment. Fedor, he's taking on Rampage this week in the New Year's Eve card is going down, and I know PFL is also, I'll be there at PFL for the championship. So any thoughts on anything that's going down over the weekend?
Yeah, we got some really excited fights for the weekend. They're not getting a lot of hype, I don't think, because of how the schedule's been, but like you said, Rampage and Fedor, that's a legendary matchup, probably past its prime, but it's still nonetheless a legendary matchup, and I think they're saying it's going to be Fedor's last fight. In MMA, there's no way of knowing if that's the truth. People come and go, so no way of knowing if that's true. But them two fighting in Japan on New Year's, that's awesome right there. Michael Chandler's also on that card. They have some other greats on that card too. And then, like you said, the PFL Championships. So it's an exciting week for fights, just none in the UFC.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to, even though I'm going to the PFL one up in New York, I'm actually looking more forward to the Risen Bellator card, the Rampage and Fedor one, just because Rampage, he's been quiet this year, hasn't he? Feel like he's just been quiet all year, and for Fedor, anytime Fedor fights, it's an event. So I'm looking forward to that one. But all right, that's it for that one. Just wanted to touch on that before we get out of here. Anything else you feel like we missed? Anything else you want to go over? Again, Johnny Walker, he's taking on Nikita Krylov. I know we touched on that in the beginning, but anything else before we?
No, I think we just about covered everything.
All right, so that's it for this one. Again, you You can find Austin on Twitter at MMAPanic. Once again, Austin on Twitter at MMAPanic. And you can find me on Twitter at Nixon_speaks. And as always, I'll see you guys later on in the week.